Before we begin today's story, I'd like to share a brief mention of our incredible sponsor, Rocket Money. I have a habit of signing up for subscriptions and then forgetting about them. Often, while doing research, I'll subscribe to access paywalled content only to leave it unnoticed later. Additionally, I've lost track of numerous streaming services I no longer use. That's why I was so pleased to start using Rocket Money, a comprehensive personal finance tool designed to help cancel unwanted subscriptions, reduce bills, and better manage your finances. Rocket Money scanned all my subscriptions, and with just a few clicks, I canceled the ones I no longer needed. In mere moments, I saved more than $100 every month, a relief I can't express. Many users share this satisfaction. Rocket Money has helped customers collectively save over $500 million, with individuals saving up to $740 annually by unlocking all its premium features. Besides subscription management, Rocket Money offers tools to help lower your bills, set budgets, and optimize your spending. It's an exceptionally useful platform that can significantly improve your financial health. Consider giving it a try to start saving more and spending less. Over 500 million users have already joined. Visit rockymoney.com/criminallylisted or follow the link in the description to begin your free trial. A heartfelt thanks to Rocket Money for sponsoring our content. Transitioning to today's story, on the evening of January 11th, 1959, 29-year-old Carol Jackson, who worked at a feed store, and his 27-year-old wife Mildred, along with their 2 young daughters, 4-year-old Janet and 17-month-old Susan, had visited Mildred's parents in Buckner, Virginia. Around 9:40 in the evening, they headed home toward Apple Grove, Virginia, but tragically never arrived. Their car was soon discovered abandoned nearby, suggesting they had been forced off the road and kidnapped. Once their disappearance made headlines, a couple came forward to police, reporting that earlier that night, a man in a blue car had attempted to run them off the road, but they escaped unharmed. 2 months later, the body of Carol Jackson was found in a ditch near Fredericksburg, Virginia. When the authorities removed his body, they discovered the remains of their daughter, Janet, beneath him. Carol had been beaten with a pistol and shot once in the head, while Janet had also sustained a blow to her head and was likely suffocated under her father's body. Pathologists concluded she had been alive when placed there and died from suffocation. Investigators found spent shell casings from a .38 caliber revolver, which likely dislodged during the attack. The bodies of Mildred and Susan had not been located at that time. 2 weeks later, their bodies were recovered near Annapolis, Maryland. Mildred showed signs of sexual assault and had been tortured before she was repeatedly struck in the head, indicating brutal violence. After being beaten, she suffocated on her own blood, while Susan had also been killed by blunt force. The police scoured the surrounding area, eventually discovering an abandoned building nearby. Inside, they found a dress button belonging to Mildred, suggesting she had been assaulted there. Authorities believed her body, along with her daughters, was partially buried at that location. They noted similarities between this case and another murder that had occurred approximately 18 months earlier. On June 26th, in the year 1957, a 35-year-old woman named Margaret Harold and her companion sat parked in a car along a secluded lane in Minneapolis. Suddenly, an armed man entered the back seat, demanding their money. When Harold refused to comply, he shot her twice in the back of the head. Her companion bolted from the vehicle, prompting the attacker to fire 3 shots at him. He escaped unharmed and sought refuge in a nearby farmhouse. Responding officers soon arrived, and they discovered Harold's lifeless body. The medical examiner confirmed she had been sexually assaulted after being fatally shot. Investigators scoured the area and found an abandoned concrete building close to the crime scene. In its basement, they discovered bindings, similar to those found earlier that day. Earlier still, another couple had been approached nearby by a man attempting to bind their hands. They managed to flee, though one wrist remained tied. This same type of binding was discovered in the shack. The victims described the attacker to a sketch artist, while photographs were plastered on one wall of the building. Some of the photos depicted young women in explicit poses, cut from magazines, and others showed a yearbook photo of a young woman named Wanda Tipton. When police contacted her, she claimed no knowledge of how her image ended up there, nor did she recognize anyone matching the killer's description. Meanwhile, the case of Margaret Harold remained unsolved until the Jackson family was murdered 1.5 years later. Although authorities suspected a connection, they had no definitive suspect. Nevertheless, someone did. Soon after the Jacksons' deaths, a man named Glenn Moser sent a letter claiming that his friend, a 30-year-old man named Melvin Ree, was the killer. Moser had grown suspicious of Ree since the Margaret Harold case, noting how much Ree resembled the sketch of the suspect. Ree also had a known fascination with sexual violence. His favorite author, the French libertine Marquis de Sade, was infamous for sadistic, sexually explicit stories. Years earlier, Ree had been arrested for a sex crime when a woman accused him of kidnapping and assaulting her at a bus stop in 1955. The charges were eventually dropped when the woman decided not to proceed with the trial. Moser and an acquaintance sought to provoke Ree into revealing his thoughts on murder by engaging him in a philosophical debate, hoping he might unwittingly confess to the earlier crimes. Moser suspected Ree was being evasive, but he never uncovered concrete evidence linking him to any crime. One day, he directly asked Ree if he had killed Margaret Harold. Ree seemed offended by the question and stormed out, yet he never outright denied the murder. As Moser reflected, it became increasingly unlikely that his lifelong friend, whom he had known since childhood, was a cold-blooded killer. Gradually, Moser convinced himself of Ree's innocence. In January of 1959, Ree moved into Moser's beach house in Norfolk, Virginia, where they lived together during the time the Jackson family was murdered. Moser recalled that night vividly, especially the kidnapping, which he couldn't forget. Ree was a talented musician, proficient on the saxophone, piano, and clarinet, earning his living performing in jazz bands and giving music lessons. On the night of the abduction, Ree was scheduled to perform at a nightclub in Washington, D.C., but he left late, and Moser doubted he would arrive on time. Before the Jacksons' kidnapping, a witness reported an encounter with a dark-haired man in a blue car attempting to force their vehicle off the road. Moser later wrote in a letter that Ree owned a blue car, but police did not pursue the lead for several months. It was only in the fall of the following year that the FBI contacted Moser multiple times and administered a polygraph test, which he passed. The investigation into Ree intensified when authorities uncovered incriminating evidence. It emerged that Ree had attended the University of Maryland for several semesters in the mid-1950s, during which he dated a student named Wanda Tipton. Her photo was found in a shack near the site where Margaret Harold's body was discovered. Police obtained a search warrant for Ree's home in Hyattsville, Maryland, close to where the murders of Margaret Harold and the Jackson family had taken place. In the attic, they discovered an accordion case containing a blood-stained .48 caliber revolver. Nearby, they found pistol grips matching those on the weapon used to kill Carol Jackson and her infant daughter, Janet. The gun's seller confirmed that Ree was the buyer of these grips. Ballistic tests verified that the revolver was responsible for the two murders. Among the items in Ree's attic was a diary, written in his own handwriting, bearing chilling entries. One described pulling over a couple on a lonely road, threatening the husband and forcing the wife and baby into the trunk before killing them. Another detailed how Ree had killed the husband and infant, then claimed the mother and daughter as his own. Photos of Mildred and Susan Jackson, cut from newspapers, were pasted in his diary, alongside drawings, one depicting a gag over Mildred's mouth, and another illustrating how he sexually assaulted her before killing her. Ree was arrested in June of 1960, and during the lineup, the man accompanying Margaret Harold at the time identified Ree as her murderer. These mounting pieces of evidence pointed strongly to Ree's guilt in the multiple murders. In August 1958, a young man with dark hair driving a blue car forced a married couple off the road. At gunpoint, he compelled them to enter his vehicle and later took them to a remote area where he sexually assaulted the woman. Surprisingly, he then released them. The woman later identified Ree as the abductor. Melvin Reeves faced trial initially for the murders of Mildred and Susan Jackson. As these crimes occurred across Virginia and Maryland, the case was federal. After a trial lasting about a month and a jury deliberation of 5 hours, Ree was convicted. Several months later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Subsequently, Ree was extradited to Virginia to face charges for the murder of Carol Jackson. His trial in January 1961 lasted only 25 minutes before he was convicted and condemned to death. Although he was also charged in connection with the murders of a 17-month-old girl and a 35-year-old woman, it was decided not to pursue those cases since he was already sentenced to life and death. The 1972 Supreme Court ruling declaring the death penalty unconstitutional led to Ree's death sentence being commuted to life imprisonment. Beyond these known crimes, Melvin Ree remains a prime suspect in several other murders. On the morning of June 15, 1955, 16-year-old Nancy Showman and her 14-year-old neighbor, Michael Ann Ryan, headed towards a Maryland high school to pick up her report card. While walking near some woods, an unidentified shooter opened fire. Nancy was shot 11 times, while Michael was hit 3 times. Their bodies were discovered roughly 2 hours after they left home. Despite extensive searches, the murder weapon was never recovered. Authorities believe it was a Marlin .22 caliber repeating rifle. Witnesses near the park, including construction workers, recalled seeing a man with a rifle that morning. A police sketch resembled Melvin Ree. At the time, Ree attended the University of Maryland, close to the scene. However, he never confessed to these murders. In 1996, another man, James Doig, claimed on his deathbed to have committed the double murder, though his account lacked details matching the crime scene, raising doubts about its credibility. Nonetheless, law enforcement continues to suspect Ree's involvement. Ree is also connected to another series of murders. In an interview in 1985, Ree confessed to the Jackson family murders and the killing of Margaret Harold. He also admitted to committing additional murders. One such case involved the disappearance of 8-year-old Mary Elizabeth Spellers and 16-year-old Shelby Jean Venable in Laurel, Maryland, on June 1, 1956. Witnesses saw the girls enter a blue car, and a week later, Mary's body was found floating in the Batumiak River. 5 days later, Shelby's naked body was discovered in a creek approximately 9 miles from where Elizabeth's had been found. The creek, located off the Batumiak River, bore silent witness to the tragedy. The cause of Mary's death remained undetermined, but Shelby had been strangled, confirming a brutal murder. During his spree, Ree admitted to being addicted to methamphetamines. When questioned about whether he felt remorse, he replied that living with guilt was no longer difficult, as he had found faith and believed he was forgiven. Melvin Ree, notorious as the Sex Beast, was never released and passed away in August of the year when he was 66 years old. Turning to the second case, Danny Rowling's name remains infamous. On the 26th of August, 1990, police responded to a call from an apartment in Gainesville, Florida, where 2 young women had gone missing for 3 days. Sonia Larson, aged 18, and Christina Powell, aged 17, both students at the University of Florida, lived there. Their apartment was roughly 1 mile from the campus. Sonia aspired to become an elementary school teacher, while Christina studied theology. When authorities arrived, they encountered a disturbing scene. Sonia was beaten, sexually assaulted, stabbed multiple times, and posed in a degrading manner. Christina met a similar fate, having been sexually assaulted and stabbed 5 times in the chest and back, her body arranged provocatively. Both victims had been bound with tape, which the killer later removed, taking it with him. To destroy evidence, he had washed the corpses with dish soap. Interestingly, nothing was stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry or a break-in. The following day, police were called to another apartment about 3 miles away, belonging to Krista Hoy, an 18-year-old attending Santa Fe Community College and working part-time as a records clerk for the sheriff's department. When she failed to report for work, a deputy investigated her residence and found a horrifying scene. Krista's disemboweled body was posed sitting on the bed's edge, with her head decapitated and placed upright on a top shelf of the bedroom's bookcase, facing her body as if staring. She had been stabbed numerous times. Authorities believe the killer had removed the latch from her sliding glass door while she was away, waited inside for her return, then assaulted her. Like the previous victims, Krista had been bound with tape, which the killer took with him afterward. All 3 murders, concluded investigators, were committed by the same individual, though his identity remained unknown. On August 28, 1990, for the 3rd consecutive day, law enforcement responded to another apartment occupied by students. Manuel Taboado, aged 23, and Tracy Paulus, also 23, were roommates, non-romantically involved. Tracy favored having a male roommate for her security. Manuel was a physically imposing man who had played offensive guard in high school. Tragically, Tracy had been stabbed 3 times, while Manuel suffered 31 stab wounds. Tracy had endured sexual assault both before and after her death, setting her case apart from 3 previous murders. Unlike the others, this crime scene showed marks in the door frame, leading investigators to believe the killer had forced entry. Remarkably, neither Tracy nor her victim, Emmanuel Tabata, was mutilated. Yet forensic evidence suggested they were killed by the same individual. Authorities speculated that the attacker may have been interrupted before he could inflict further harm. The police scheduled the murders of Sonia Larson and Christina Powell on August 24th, followed by Krista Hoy on August 25th, and the slayings of Tracy Pace and Emmanuel Tabota on August 27th. The media dubbed the perpetrator the Gainesville Ripper. In the immediate aftermath, no arrests had been made, but investigators identified an 18-year-old suspect, Edward Humphrey. Humphrey, marked by facial scars from a past car accident, had a history of mental health issues and was known to carry knives. Living in the same apartment complex as the last victims, Manuel Tabata and Tracy Pace, Humphrey reportedly harbored a crush on Tracy. On August 30th, 2 days after Emmanuel's body was discovered, Humphrey was detained for assaulting his grandmother. Yet, authorities found no physical evidence linking him to the murders, no fingerprints or other forensic traces. DNA samples collected from the crime scenes matched a single man's profile, but by October, it was confirmed that this DNA did not belong to Humphrey, and he was officially cleared of suspicion. Simultaneously, a news article in the Miami Herald drew parallels between the Gainesville murders and a mass killing that had taken place nearly 10 months earlier in Shreveport, Louisiana. The victims there were a family of 3: 55-year-old Tom Graham, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and her 8-year-old son Sean. When family members failed to contact them on November 6th, police were dispatched to check on the household. Tom Graham's body was discovered in the laundry room, stabbed multiple times in the chest. Sean's body was found in the living room, also stabbed once in the chest, with the blade penetrating through his torso and emerging from his back. Julie was discovered in her bed, positioned in a sexually provocative manner. She had been repeatedly stabbed and slashed across her back, and had suffered bites to her breasts. The killer had used vinegar to attempt to erase physical evidence from her body, and she was bound with tape, which the perpetrator took with him. It is believed that the murders occurred the night before the bodies were discovered. The Miami Herald noted that all victims were young, petite women, and highlighted that in Julie Graham's murder, as well as some of the Gainesville victims, the killer had employed cleaning agents such as vinegar and dish soap, likely in an effort to obliterate forensic evidence. The killer used tape to restrain his victims, often taking it with him, and deliberately posed several bodies in sexually suggestive positions, notably with their hair spread out over their heads. For months beforehand, Gainesville investigators maintained contact with the police in Shreveport, initially doubting that the same man was responsible for both sets of murders. However, once Edward Humphrey was cleared as a suspect, authorities considered the possibility that the Shreveport slaughter and Gainesville killings might be connected. Yet, they remained uncertain about the perpetrator's identity. In November of 1990, a tip led the police to investigate a man named Danny Harold Rowling. A woman in Shreveport contacted Crime Stoppers, driven by a persistent suspicion that Rowling was the killer. She explained that she and her husband had befriended him at church, and he often visited their home. Several months after the Grahams were murdered, her husband had told her Rowling was no longer welcome because he had confided his dark fantasies, admitting he enjoyed stabbing people. Later, in late August of 1990, she heard about the Gainesville Ripper murders, and a particular remark Rowling made stayed with her. He had said, "One day, I'm going to leave this town and go where the girls are beautiful, where I can lie in the sun and watch gorgeous women all day." This comment, she believed, indicated sinister intentions. Authorities began scrutinizing Rowling, born in May of 1954 in Shreveport. His father, James, was a police officer, but his childhood was marred by violence and mental illness within the family. When James was a boy, he witnessed his grandmother being murdered by his grandfather, who slit her throat while she soaked her feet, a trauma that haunted him for life. James grew into an abusive husband and father, often beating his wife Claudia and their sons Danny and Kevin. Danny was subjected to regular violence from the earliest years, leading to frequent school absences and repeated academic setbacks. His mother repeatedly left, but always returned to an environment of hostility and abuse. By the age of 11, Danny began drinking alcohol, and soon after, experimented with drugs like marijuana and LSD. His criminal record started developing in 1979 when, at the age of 25, he was sentenced to 6 years for robbing 3 grocery stores, attempting escape multiple times. Released in June of 1984, his trouble was not over. 2 years later, in March of 1986, he was convicted again for armed theft and sentenced to 4 more years. Paroled in July of 1988, Danny's life was now spiraling downward, just over a year before the Grahams murders. 6 months after the mass killings, in May of 1990, Danny, then 35, was involved in a violent confrontation with his father, an intense gunfight that ended with Danny uninjured, but his father shot in the stomach and forehead. His father survived, but was severely scarred, losing an eye and an ear after a violent incident in which Danny believed he had killed him. Terrified and guilt-ridden, Danny fled town, unable to face what he thought was his crime. By November of 1990, when law enforcement began investigating Danny Rowling, he was already imprisoned in Florida, serving a life sentence. Less than 14 days after the Gainesville murders, on the 7th of September 1990, Danny committed a robbery at a grocery store in Ocala. During the heist, he led police on a reckless, high-speed chase, which ended when he crashed his car. Remarkably, he emerged unharmed and was quickly taken into custody. A few days later, on the 17th of September, he pleaded guilty to the robbery and was sentenced to life imprisonment, as he was considered a repeat offender. Rowling's criminal history provided crucial insight for investigators. Hours prior to the murder of Krista Hoy, authorities learned of a bank heist just half a mile from her home. Given Rowling's background of armed robberies, suspicions grew that he might have committed this robbery too. During the heist, a teller had accidentally placed a dye pack with dye-stained money into the bag handed to the robber, a detail that would become important later. Shortly after the bank robbery, police spotted 2 men acting nervously near the forest's edge close to the scene. When officers attempted to question them, one fled into the woods while the other was detained. The man arrested claimed no knowledge of the robbery or the other individual. Upon searching their campsite, officers discovered several items: dyed money, a brown ski mask, a 9mm handgun, and a cassette player with a tape inside. Initially, there was no reason to connect these to the murders, as the victims had been stabbed rather than shot. The police did not listen to the tape at that time. It remained stored in evidence. Later, they retrieved and played it, discovering a recording of a man singing, talking, and then identifying himself as Danny Rowling. This evidence confirmed his presence near Gainesville during the time of the murders. In January of 1991, while incarcerated, Rowling had a tooth extracted, which DNA analysis linked directly to the evidence collected from the crime scene. The DNA profile from his tooth matched the sample taken from the Gainesville Ripper. By November, he faced 5 murder charges. Surprisingly, Rowling confessed, but in a peculiar manner. He enlisted another inmate, Bobby Lewis, already on death row for killing a drug dealer, to write his confession. Rowling agreed to meet investigators only if Lewis credited himself with the crimes. Lewis recounted the details, revealing information only the killer would know, and confirmed their accuracy to the police. Furthermore, Lewis provided new insights, such as how Rowling had returned to the scene of Krista Hoy's murder after initially leaving, because he thought he had misplaced his wallet. It was during this revisit that he decided to decapitate her. Rowling later explained that he suffered from multiple personalities, which influenced his actions during the murders. Danny Rowling, whose name is a reversal of Nad, was a man with a complex personality. He described Nad as a decent, if flawed, individual, yet clear that Nad was not truly evil. The other, more malevolent facet of his psyche, named Gemini, was responsible for the deadly murders that haunted his story. In February of 1994, Rowling faced trial in Florida, pleading guilty to those heinous crimes. The court's focus then shifted to his sentencing, determining whether he would face death or spend his life behind bars. His defense argued for clemency, citing severe abuse inflicted by his father and pointing to evidence of mental illness. Rowling also claimed he suffered from multiple personalities, a defense met with skepticism. Prosecutors contended his claims were fabricated, inspired by the movie The Exorcist III that he watched in Gainesville. Ultimately, Danny Rowling was condemned to death and spent over 12 years on death row. His scheduled execution was set for October 25, 2006. On his last day, he requested a meal of lobster tail, butterfly shrimp, a baked potato, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. Before being taken to the execution chamber, Rowling handed a note to his spiritual advisor, confessing his involvement in the Griom family murders. For his final words, he sang Christian hymns for nearly 3 minutes. At 6:13 p.m., the 52-year-old was pronounced dead. Rowling's brutal killing spree in Gainesville would inspire the plot of the 1996 slasher film Scream. In a different tragic story stands Herbert Mullen, born on April 18, 1947, in Salinas, California. His family relocated to San Francisco when he was 5, and later moved to Felton during his middle school years. Despite these upheavals, Mullen's family environment was stable. They were devout Catholics, and he grew up unscathed by abuse. An exceptionally intelligent youth, he earned the title of most likely to succeed in high school. However, he harbored odd beliefs, such as denying his father's alleged abuse because he thought his father despised him. A turning point occurred in June of 1965, when his close friend, 8-year-old Dean Richardson, was killed in a motorcycle accident. Mullen was deeply affected, mourning his friend by constructing a shrine in his bedroom. During this period, he developed an obsession with reincarnation. Dean's death marked the beginning of a decline in Mullen's mental stability. His behavior became increasingly bizarre and unpredictable. He repeatedly sought a sexual relationship with his sister, grew angry when rebuffed, believing she didn't love him. His drug use escalated, experimenting with marijuana and LSD, which further blurred his sense of reality. By September of 1965, Mullen enrolled at Cabrillo College in Aptos, studying road engineering. But after 2 years, he graduated. In 1967, he transferred to San Jose State College, shifting his focus from engineering to philosophy, only to drop out after 1 semester. Throughout his 20s, his grip on reality continued to slip, and he began hearing voices, signaling a deepening mental health crisis. Early in 1969, he engaged in bizarre and disturbing behaviors that shocked his family, marking a tragic descent into instability. His family was gathered for dinner when Mullen began mimicking every move his brother-in-law made. For instance, whenever his brother-in-law took a drink, Mullen did the same. This repetitive behavior, known as echopraxia, is often associated with schizophrenia. Such incidents mark the beginning of Mullen's mental health struggles, leading to his first hospitalization at the age of 21. He spent 6 weeks confined in the hospital, and just a month later, he checked himself in again, staying only for a short period. By October of 1969, a friend noticed Mullen's strange behavior and contacted his uncle, a physician. The doctor recognized signs of severe mental disturbance and diagnosed him with schizophrenia. This was the 3rd hospitalization for Mullen, who remained in mental health care for about 8 weeks. Between 1969 and 1972, he was hospitalized 6 or more times across 5 different facilities, battling ongoing psychiatric issues. Though he was arrested multiple times for drug-related offenses, he was never convicted of these crimes, nor was he ever accused of violence. In May of 1974, while researching in a library, Mullen discovered that the renowned physicist Albert Einstein had died on his 5th birthday. He interpreted this coincidence as a sign of his destined greatness, and eventually believed he was Einstein's reincarnation. During his mid-20s, voices in his head told him that he must sacrifice humans to prevent catastrophic earthquakes in California. Mullen's birth coincided exactly with the 41st anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the deadliest in U.S. history, which claimed over 3,000 lives and destroyed 80% of the city. In the fall of 1972, living with his parents, Mullen felt increasingly unbalanced. On October 13th that year, he encountered a 55-year-old transient named Lawrence White. Mullen claimed White telepathically volunteered to be sacrificed, and he responded by feigning car trouble to lure White closer. As White approached, Mullen retrieved a baseball bat from his trunk and struck him in the head, intending to stab him in the heart. Instead, the blow was fatal, killing White instantly. Just 11 days later, Mullen picked up 24-year-old hitchhiker Mary Guilfoyle. He drove her to a quiet street and stabbed her in the chest with a hunting knife. She died within moments. Mullen then took her body to a wooded area in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where he disemboweled and deboned her leg, searching for signs of pollution. Her body remained unrecovered for months. On November 2nd of that year, Mullen entered a Catholic church in Los Angeles and sat in the confessional opposite 64-year-old Father Andre Toé. Mullen confessed to the priest that he had committed 2 murders, claiming that he believed Toé communicated with him telepathically and that he was next in line to be sacrificed. Suddenly, Mullen pulled the priest out of the confessional, assaulted him violently, and then stabbed him in the chest with his hunting knife before fleeing the scene. For a lengthy period, Herbert Mullen attributed his troubles to marijuana, convinced it had impaired his brain. All of his arrests stemmed from drug-related issues, and he believed that his criminal record, which included mental health evaluations, would prevent him from joining the Marines. Mullen viewed his first encounter with drugs as part of a sinister plot aimed at destroying his life. The drug was introduced to him by his friend Jim Gennaria. On January 25, 1974, Mullen went to Jim's last known residence, only to find he had moved. The new occupant provided Jim's updated address, and Mullen then visited his friend's new home. Jim welcomed him inside, but the encounter turned violent when Mullen shot Jim, aged 25, 3 times. Immediately afterward, he shot Jim's wife, Joan, who was 21, also 3 times in the face, intending to ensure her death. Recognizing the risk of being linked to the murders, Mullen then targeted Kathy Francis, a 29-year-old woman living in Jim's former house, and the one who had given him Jim's new address. Mullen drove to Kathy's home, and when she answered the door, he shot her in the head. Entering further, he found her 2 young sons, 9-year-old David Hughes and 4-year-old Damien, and shot both in the head. Soon after the murders, the remains of Mary Guilfoyle were discovered. Exactly 2 weeks after these 5 kills, on February 10, 1973, Mullen was hiking in Herbert Hill Redwood State Park in the Santa Cruz Mountains. There, he encountered 4 campers: 18-year-old David Oliker, 15-year-old Mark DeBelbis, 18-year-old Robert Spector, and 19-year-old Brian Card. Mullen warned them to leave, claiming they were engaging in illegal activity. When they mocked him, he feigned being a park ranger and insisted they must depart. However, they challenged his claim, and he failed to produce proof. Mullen retreated, but later returned after nightfall, reappearing at the campers' tent while they slept in their sleeping bags. There, he shot all 4 in the forehead, then stole their money and a .22 caliber rifle. 3 days later, on February 13th, Mullen was driving through Santa Cruz when he spotted 72-year-old Fred Perez working in his garden. Mullen pulled over, brandished the stolen rifle, and shot Perez in the chest. A neighbor observed the killing and noted Mullen's license plate, leading to his swift arrest without resistance. Found beside him was the same .22 caliber pistol used in his earlier crimes. The rifles used to kill the 4 campers were recovered 4 days after his arrest, along with other evidence tying Mullen to the murders. Authorities discovered Father Tom's rosary and an address book in his apartment, the latter containing Jim Gennaria's contact details. Additionally, Mullen's fingerprints were found inside a church confessional. Fully confessing, Herbert Mullen, aged 25, admitted to killing 13 people over the course of 4 months. Initially, he faced charges for 10 of these murders. Herbert Mullen was not initially charged with the first 3 murders, those of Lawrence White, Mary Guilfoyle, and Henri Toé. To streamline the trial, prosecutors and defense agreed to focus solely on 10 subsequent homicides. Mullen expressed a desire to represent himself and pleaded guilty, but the court deemed him mentally unfit to do so, though he remained confident in facing the proceedings. His trial for these 10 murders commenced on July 30th, 1973, with Mullen pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. He had a documented history of mental illness, including a diagnosis of schizophrenia. During the trial, Mullen testified that voices in his head commanded him to kill to prevent earthquakes. Psychiatrists for the prosecution concurred that he suffered from schizophrenia, but maintained that he understood his actions were wrong. The trial spanned 3 weeks, with the jury deliberating for 2 days, ultimately convicting Mullen of 2 counts of first-degree murder for Joan and Jim Gennara, and 8 counts of second-degree murder for Kathy Francis, her 2 sons, and 4 teenage campers. In September, he received a life sentence for the first-degree convictions, and a further 5 years to life for the second-degree charges. Since he had already been sentenced to life 11 times, the district attorney chose not to pursue charges for White's and Guilfoyle's murders. Mullen filed for parole after serving 7 years in 1,980, but was denied each of the next 22 years, despite making 10 applications. Herbert Mullen died in prison at the age of 75 in August of 2022, having spent nearly 50 years behind bars.